Hey, thank you very much, and welcome to today's event, which is about English Language Specification B for EB1. And these are insights from the June 2024 exam paper. So in your download today, which is under the resources button, there are three documents. SO1 is a copy of this PowerPoint that I'll be using today. SO2 is the examiner report, and much of what I'll be talking about today is actually from that examiner report. So you can follow along. I'll be giving you some page numbers as we go through. And SO3, which in case you haven't seen it, is the question paper from June 2024. So you're all very welcome. For me, it's good morning, but I know this is an international specification. So for you, it may be afternoon or evening, but wherever you are in the world, you're all very welcome. As I said, this is a short event, but we are aiming to get through quite a lot of material. So we've got this little introduction. We've got an overview of paper one. Of course, there is only one paper for specification B. We've got some detailed analysis of the questions from the June 2024 paper. We're looking at what students did well, what students did less well, that kind of thing. We've got a little bit of summary support and where to access future events, and there'll be the opportunity for questions as well. So most of the content comes from that examiner report, which is SO2 in your pack, and that is on the website as well. So we're looking today at the main paper from June 2024. But there is also a report for the R paper, the regional paper. So the feedback is relevant to both papers, but the examples are specific to the main paper. I hope that makes sense. So that's where we're going. Just to say that this isn't a marking exercise, so there are no full scripts for you. The full scripts are in the examiner report. There will be little extracts just to say what went well and what didn't go so well. This is much more insights than marking. So the aims today, we've only got an hour, so we're looking at hopefully giving you some feedback on the performance of candidates in the May-June exam series. We're going to consider the variation of candidate performance on different questions and explore. Basically, we're looking at what good responses look like and what less good responses look like, what the higher and lower responses were. We're going to look at key points from the examiner report and think about any common issues. So that's our cunning plan. So just an overview of the paper, what it looked like. Obviously, this is available for you in the download. There were two texts which were about the environment. So text one was 7 ways in which youth can protect the environment, and that was adapted from a blog by Isha Reddy. In the passage, the American writer suggests possible actions that young people can take to protect the environment. And text 2 was the climate book, which is adapted from a book by Greta Thunberg. And the passage, the writer suggests that climate change is already happening and not enough is being done by people and governments to prevent it. So the comments on the right-hand side here are from the examiner report. They're from page 3, if you're following along in that download. So the texts are about protecting the environment and climate change, accessible across the full range of abilities, and candidates were able to engage with the task and respond appropriately. Examiners commented on the relevance of the topic. Examiners commented there was evidence of some good teaching and learning in preparation for this examination in the responses seen, and many candidates seemed generally well prepared. So a quick overview of section A. Again, this is from the examiner report. We're page 3 of the examiner report. We've got a couple of slides here. There are many useful comments here. But obviously there are lots of tips and overview, lots more tips and overview in the full examiner report. So the reading section, as we know, for this paper, section A, has 7 questions. We will be looking at questions in turn later on in the presentation. So this is very much an overview. So more successful candidates were able to engage fully with both texts and respond thoughtfully and articulately. Less successful candidates sometimes struggled to understand the passages and the questions. There were some candidates who made references to the pictures in their responses to question 3 and question 6 and question 7. This is not an appropriate way to respond to the text, as the pictures are not language or structural devices chosen for effect by the writer. Some also commented on the glossaries, which are not a feature of the text, but are there to aid candidate understanding. There were a number of blank responses, notably for question 7, which may indicate issues with timing. Candidates should be encouraged to respond to every question. So of course, it will depend very much on your candidature. Sometimes we have questions about how would you split the time, but it really depends on your students, and you know them better than we do. So for sections B and C, section B, there were some candidates who copied out all or considerable parts of the extract in response to question 8. This can never be a successful way to respond, as candidates are required to produce their own work and show the ability to adapt the original text for a different audience and purpose. So again, this is from the examiner report from page 3. And for section C, writing responses from more successful candidates were often engaging and effective and were well controlled and accurate. Writing responses from less successful candidates were often pedestrian or lacked coherence and had weak language controls. There was also some comments, you'll find this in the examiner report, about people learning responses that don't necessarily fit the task that's been set. So they come along to the exam with a learnt response, writing response, or some very heavily scaffolded response. And that kind of approach really doesn't allow candidates to develop their own ideas. There was evidence of planning, which is to be encouraged. However, the use of very long plans or draft essays is to be discouraged, as that can't be a good use of time. Obviously, this is a demanding question paper with 3 hours. Candidates have got a lot to do, a lot of skills to show. So, drafting and writing up, they really don't have time for that. They should, however, be encouraged to plan their response in the answer booklet rather than on additional paper, of course, which they shouldn't be using. So we're moving on now. That was a very quick quick overview of the paper. We're going to look at the papers now in more detail. In more detail, we're going to look at the assessment objectives and the questions. So we're going to delve into how students of different abilities responded to the questions and the requirements of the mark scheme. So it's very logical. We're going to start with paper 1, section A. So in the middle of the screen here, we have the question that was asked in June 2024. So the question was, in this section, recycle more often, give one way the writer says that recycling is helpful. It's an AL1, so it's a retrieval style question. The comments that are going to appear on the screen in a moment are from page 4 of the examiner report. There's a little bit of animation going to happen here, so we'll just have a look at this. So straightforward question on text 1, which does not require candidates to use their own words. The majority of candidates responded correctly, and the most popular correct responses were: it reduces individual carbon footprint and it helps reduce landfill pollution. Examiners did comment that many candidates were giving too many points for this 1-mark question, and perhaps, obviously, therefore, spending a little bit too long on it. And that will obviously be at the expense of something from the high tariff questions later on in the question paper. The most common errors came from describing the recycling process, which does not answer the question, or using the wrong lines. So that's a little bit about question 1, AO1 question. Question 2 is also an AO1 question. And the question here was, in the section Buy Sustainable Products, the writer offers advice about buying items which are environmentally friendly. Identify one piece of advice. So again, it's retrieval style. These comments that I'm going to go through now are from page 5 of the examiner report. So questions 1 and 2 require students to use quotation rather than their own words, and to not write too much or spend too much time on these low tariff questions. So candidates must ensure they read the question and the text carefully. This is a straightforward question on text 1, which does not require candidates to use their own words. Examiners did comment that many candidates were writing too much and giving too many points for this 1-mark question. And again, like question 1, spending too long on it. And the most common error was responses that did not include sufficient information, for example, reusable water bottles or local products. So those are the 2 AO1 questions on the first text. As we know, the candidates on this paper go through the text. So moving on to question 3, which is an AO2 question. This is from page 6 of the examiner report, and it talks about how some students were less successful in their responses. There is some more specific advice about types of language features, etc., in the full examiner report. So the little extract, it isn't a full response, this little extract on the left-hand side is a level 2. It got 4 marks in the actual exam. It's on page 11 of the examiner report. So the question here was, explain how the writer presents her ideas about how young people can protect the environment. You should support your answer with close reference to the passage, including brief quotations. So less successful candidates produced responses that were often content-based. They tended to focus on what the writer said, rather than how the writer presented her ideas about how young people can protect the environment. It was clear that the text in most of these responses was understood, and there were suitable references and quotations made in the answers. However, there were only comments such as tells us, states, talks about, describes, presents, and nothing else that would answer the question as to how. So it's very much here about the command words, isn't it? And then, of course, we have these lovely tips, the examiner tips in the examiner report. So the tip here for the less successful candidate would be to improve the mark. Candidate would need to provide more examples of how the writer uses language and structure for effect, and develop their points on the intended effects of the writer's choices. So in terms of more successful responses, this is from, if you're following along in the examiner report, this is from page 6. This response, it's obviously only a clip, it's a screenshot of a bit of a response here. This one is a more successful response. It received 8 out of the possible 10 marks. So it's a more successful response, and generally speaking, more successful candidates produced responses that were developed, analytical, and examined a range of language and structure features used, exploring the impact on the reader and the intended effect. They were able to explore and analyze how ideas were presented, supporting their points with embedded quotations and references. A good range of points was selected, including the use of imperatives, the use of inclusive pronouns, and the use of statistics to give credibility together with the use of subheadings, listings, direct address, questions, and the informal friendly tone. A number related the writer's techniques successfully to the intended audience of young people, identifying features like the use of informal language and how imperatives were used to encourage action. So that's an 8 out of 10, but you will find it in the examiner report. So a little summary. This is page 7 from the examiner report. That, of course, when we're thinking about question 3, we're thinking about text 1, but we're also thinking about question 6, which is the same skills. So we're still on AO2 for question 6, but it's on text 2. So a number of the things in this summary are going to be, we need to keep in mind for our question 6 as well. So a number of examiners observed that candidates did not comment on the effects of their chosen features on the reader. They identified techniques, but failed to make specific reference to the writer's intended effects, saying little more than this interests the reader. The subheadings organize the text, or this makes the reader want to read on. There was also evidence of feature spotting, where candidates identify correctly for particular language features and offer textual support but don't explain them. Occasionally, candidates adopted a list-like approach to this question, identifying techniques and choosing appropriate references, but doing no more. Some of the least successful responses were simply summaries, retelling, sometimes with supporting quotations, or direct copies of the text. And we all know that kind of narrative descriptive approach isn't going to score well in an analytical AO2 question. Centres need to remind candidates that this question asks how the writer achieved his or her effects, not what he or she said. So that brings us to the end of the AO2 for text 1. We're now going to have a little look at questions 4 and 5, which are the AO1 questions on the second text that the examiner gives to candidates on this exam paper. So the question style and feedback is obviously going to be very similar to questions 1 to 3, because they access AO1, and AO2 in the same way, but on that different text. So we've got here in this on this slide questions 4 and 5 together, because we're looking at AO1, but the focus is on text 2 rather than text 1. So this slide just gives us 4 key points to remember when looking at these AO1 questions. So these will be relevant to both questions 1 and 2 on text 1 and questions 4 and 5 on text 2. So candidates are not required to use their own words. These are retrieval questions. Candidates need to read the question and the text carefully. Candidates need to ensure they are answering the question. and they need to ensure they're not spending too much time on these questions. You know, we are looking here at using quotations from the text, and you know, they should be quick retrieval questions, you know, just ones to relax the candidates into the paper, really. So moving on to question 6. And of course, the feedback here is very similar to question 3, but we're looking now at the second text. So this is just a summary, this slide is just a summary of performance. In the examiner report, you will find some exemplars. There's a level 3 exemplar and a level 5 exemplar. So they're there for you to read that are specific to that text too. But the summary is some examiners commented that candidates' performance was similar to question 3. However, other examiners observed that candidates did not do as well on this question, and some seemed to find the text more challenging. However, examiners commented that candidates did appreciate the passion shown by the writer. Most candidates were able to identify some features and attempt to describe the writer's intentions and effects on the reader. However, examiners commented that candidates did not always develop their comments on the intended effects of these features. They were able to comment on the language used, although there was often a tendency to explain what the chosen quotation meant, rather than to explore how it was used for effect. And I guess that's the student who uses a synonym and just says, or almost translates what the writer has said, and rather than the focus being on how the writer has used it. There was evidence of feature spotting, where candidates identify correctly particular language features and again don't explain them. Some examiners noted that there were a number of responses which expressed either agreement or disagreement with Thunberg's views without considering language and structure. You know, so almost kind of evaluating it rather than analysing it. And we have to remember that this is an AO2 analytical question 3 and question 6. So we're not going to look at specific examples here of question 6 for text 2, but there, as I said, there are 2 of them in the examiner report, a level 3 and a level 5, which can be your benchmarks for mock exams or whatever you use the June 2024 paper for in your schools. So we're going to move on now to question 7, and obviously we're changing assessment objective here. We're now moving on to AO3, which is the comparison question. So it's about planning and structuring that question. So we're, for those of you following along in the examiner report, this particular slide is a summary of some of the paragraphs from the overview of the comparison question, which is on page 23 of the examiner report. So question 7 in the June 2024 question paper was this: refer to both text 1 and text 2 to answer the following questions. Compare how the writers of text 1 and text 2 present their ideas and perspectives about climate change. Support your answer with examples from both texts. Some examiners commented that candidates engaged well with the task and most understood the need to make points of comparison, but other examiners thought candidates found this task more demanding. Some examiners commented positively on evidence of planning these responses, although others felt that there was very little evidence of even simple plans which might have aided comparison. More candidates are writing responses that are comparative throughout, For example, identifying points of comparison from each text in an integrated response. This is a successful way to respond to this task. So it's talking there about, obviously using those discourse markers, both similarly, in contrast, so that the comparison is sustained. However, there were a number of candidates who wrote about each task individually and then wrote a comparative comment at the end, often unsupported. Examiners commented that these responses were not as successful as those candidates whose responses were comparative throughout. You will find a comment in the examiner report that talks about examiners expressing a concern that candidates were writing about which of the texts they preferred. And obviously that isn't part of the comparison question in the specification. So we're going to move on now to look at a quick summary of what less successful responses look like for this question 7 and the AO3. This is just a small extract from a response. It's a level 3 response, and you'll find it on pages 29 to 30 of the examiner report. So less successful responses made few comparative comments. They tended to respond by listing comparisons, one after the other, with no references, or by listing quotations from each text with no further comment. They were often undeveloped. For example, text 1 uses subheadings and text 2 does not. Sometimes they gave summaries of the text and concluded their response with a brief overview of 1 or 2 similarities. They sometimes focused on inappropriate points of comparison, such as the use of full stops or commas, which showed little understanding of writers' ideas and perspectives. Of course, when we're thinking about perspectives, we're thinking about their views on things, their attitudes, their feelings. And, if you're looking at that micro detail of whether or not they use commas, you're not really looking at the ideas and perspectives. Of course, you can talk about the methods writers use to exemplify their own ideas and perspectives. That's a slightly different thing, isn't it? Then you are using your AO3 skills. And less successful candidates paraphrase the text, retelling the passages, or directly lifting from the text. So we have there another of those nice little examiner tips on the left-hand side. To achieve a higher mark, the responses would need to have a wider range of comparisons and to develop their points about the ideas and perspectives. So what did more successful responses look like? So this is just a short extract on the left-hand side from the level 5 response. If you want to find that extract, it's on pages 20, the full response is on pages 26 to 28. The overall response that we've got that little extract from was level 5, and it received a mark of 13 in live marking in June 2024. The more successful responses were structured comparatively by taking the various features of the text and comparing and contrasting them throughout. They made a wide range of comparisons with clear exploration of ideas and perspectives, and supported points with references which were balanced across both texts. They examined the similarities and differences and what these showed about the writer's viewpoints. Obviously, viewpoints is as we just kind of discussed, about those perspectives. They used a variety of points, such as the stylistic features of both texts, positive and negative language, opening and closing statements, writer's tone and urgency. And of course, tone will always be something that encourages candidates to talk about perspective. And they used embedded quotations to help draw a whole range of comparisons together. And another helpful tip that's specific to this level 5 response is note how the candidate compares both texts throughout the extract. Try to support all comparative points with references from the text. So that, of course, brings us to the end of the reading questions, section A of specification B. So now we're going to move on to section B. So section B, of course, is a reading and writing question. It assesses 3 assessment objectives. It's just a reminder, I'm sure you all know this, but it assesses AO1, AO4, and AO5. And this slide is just a quick summary from the examiner report. These points are from page 32. Just a reminder of the question from the June 2024 paper. It was use ideas from both text 1 and text 2 in the source booklet to answer this question. Write a letter to a friend on the topic of protecting the planet and preventing climate change. You should include, and then they have 3 bullet points, so it's a scaffolded question. The damage that is being caused to the environment and our climate, what can be done, reasons why people may not want to take action. Think carefully about the purpose of your letter and the audience for whom it is intended. Okay, I can see that someone has put that they have a question about section A. Just want to pop that into the chat, and I'll pick that up in a moment. So the summary on question 8 here, I'll just read through this slide and I'll pick up the question. Most candidates understood the requirement of the task and were able to use the appropriate register for a letter to peers. It was generally felt that candidates engaged with this task, and some produced lively and convincing responses. The most successful responses had a strong sense of audience and purpose, and included personal touches and rhetorical language to engage the audience. Many candidates were able to adopt an appropriate register, and there was clear evidence of an understanding of the purpose, audience, and format required, although some examiners commented that some candidates struggled to adopt an appropriate register. Some examiners noted they saw quite a few responses that had pre-prepared introductions, conclusions, and topic sentences, which did not add to the authenticity of their text and did not always fit in with the rest of their response. So those are just a quick overview from page 32 of the examiner report. Okay, you are going to need to pop your question into the chat, because obviously the microphones are not working for delegates because this is only a 1-hour presentation. So now we're going to look at the AOs separately for question 8. So we're going to start with AO1. Again, there's quite a lot of animation here. We've got speech bubbles. So we've got more successful candidates on the left-hand side and the less successful candidates on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, the one with the pinkish surround, that is a level 2 response, and the one with the orangish surround is a level 5 response. These comments now are going to be from pages 32 to 34 of the examiner report. So for the more successful candidates on the left-hand side, they were able to refer perceptively to information and ideas whilst maintaining the required tone and register. They were more balanced and offered a good range of points on all 3 bullets from both texts. They successfully reworked the text, covering all the bullet points in a sophisticated way and adding their own experiences and opinions. And they wrote with what felt like genuine passion on the subject and were genuinely persuasive in the way they presented the importance of climate action and cleverly blended in ideas from the text. Of course, these are topics that are very contemporary, very things that teenagers are very interested in. Okay, I'm going to pick up that question now that it's appeared in the chat. So how long should the responses for section A, questions 3, 6, and 7 be in general for a higher level mark? Students always ask these questions. Yes, and of course, I'm sure that that there is no set answer to that. It's really not about length, it's about quality. So what I would suggest to your students is if they're looking at higher level marks, then you could pick up these responses from the examiner report. You could look at that level 5 response, which is the one that I've just which are in the examiner report for those questions 3, 6, and 7, and get them. It's sort of a task you could do with a highlighter, isn't it? What is it about that response that works really well? Because we'll often see length of responses in questions 3, 6, and 7 that are not good. They can be very lengthy, but they cannot be very perceptive. So it's really about quality. So I can't give you an answer in how long they should be, but I would suggest you take a level 5 and ask your students to highlight up what is worthy of credit in relation to the mark scheme on those, and then to take perhaps a lengthy level 3 one from the examiner report and say, how could that actually be moved so that it's a level 5 response? So I'm sorry, that's a little bit vague, but I can't say to you, it needs to be 2 pages and it will get a good mark, because obviously it depends very much on what the candidate has written in relation to the question that was asked. How much analysis is there for the AO2 questions 3 and 6? How much comparison is there for the question 7? Okay, so looking at this right-hand response for AO1, the less successful questions, less successful candidates were able to select and interpret a small range of bullet points, sometimes paraphrasing the content of both texts. They wrote brief responses, did not have much focus on the ideas in the passages, and did not offer balance between the text and bullet points, and wrote responses where there was evidence of much lifting from the original text without any attempt to rework the material. So moving on now, that's our AO1. Moving on to our, is it necessary to address the 3 bullet points in order? No, not necessarily in order, but it is necessary to address them. So again, moving on now to AO4, and we've got our more successful on the left and our less successful on the right. The exemplar extracts are in the examiner report. The one on the right-hand side is level 2. The one on the left is the level 5 again. So more successful responses used a wide range of techniques to communicate their ideas, often adopting a high persuasive tone and selecting techniques such as humour, direct address, and rhetorical questions to communicate their ideas. They offered clear and well-organised responses, adapting form, tone, and register in an effective and sophisticated manner. They were lively and engaging with a convincing rapport. Obviously, that's adapting it for that given audience of the friend, and they were able to relate directly to that teenage audience. Less successful responses communicated at a basic level and had problems sustaining the required register throughout their responses, did not convey much sense that this was supposed to be a letter to a friend, often only acknowledging it in the salutation and sign-off, and often had issues with clarity as they had weak writing skills, and this impeded their ability to communicate clearly. And then for the AO5, the more successful candidates employed accurate paragraphing, which could be for effect. There was often evidence of proofreading here. The candidate knowing that their writing was also being assessed as well as their reading. They used a varied range of correctly spelt vocabulary with some ambition, and used a range of appropriate punctuation and different sentence structures to help them create particular effects. And then less successful responses sometimes struggled to communicate their ideas, and their language controls were not always secure, especially the grammar. Some examiners commented that weaker candidates had problems with grammar and expression, despite good spelling and punctuation. And other examiners noted that punctuation was an issue, with candidates writing long one-sentence paragraphs or using very little sentence punctuation. So that's those three, AO1, AO4, and AO5, some pointers on what more successful and less successful candidate responses we looked at. So that's our section B of this specification. Okay, thank you for that question. I mean, you'll see they're ideally in order because the order generally makes sense of the question. But if a candidate, I mean, sometimes you'll get very articulate candidates who take a slightly different approach. So a logical, for example here, the logical letter would do them in order. However, there may be candidates who actually can still access the very top mark, but haven't done them in order because they've taken a slightly unusual approach. Okay, so moving on now to our section C of this paper, the last section. Candidates, as we know, are given a choice of 3 questions, and our 3 questions from the June 2024 paper are here, question 9 or 10 or 11. So we're going to just look at the most popular one here, but the questions were question 9. I much prefer working in a group than on my own. To what extent do you agree with this statement? Or write a story, true or imaginary, entitled The Future, or describe the untidiest place you know. Now, in the June 2024 exam, it was question 10 that proved to be the most popular with candidates. There is a whole page of feedback and an exemplar for each of these questions in the examiner report. So we're going to, again, look at the assessment objectives separately. So we're going to start with the AO4. And again, we're going to look at what more successful and less successful candidate responses look like. You will find this is a higher level exemplar in it's a level 5 for both AO4 and AO5, the one that you'll find in the examiner report. So more successful candidates developed a story and characters with a clear narrative structure and a range of writing techniques used to good effect. These responses had fewer characters, which were well developed, and a well thought out plot designed to entertain. They were able to write entertaining and engaging responses that were sharply focused on the task. And they were able to use figurative techniques and wide-ranging vocabulary deliberately to achieve particular effects for their reader. Now, less successful responses or less successful candidates lacked development of ideas or the ability to maintain a narrative, or tended to write simplistic narratives. without any great awareness of form, tone, or register. Their responses were often lengthy, with repetitive and unfocused plot ideas. Examiners commented that some less successful responses seemed to be a prepared story which they barely adapted for the given title, which is something I referred to a bit earlier when we did our general overview of the paper. And obviously that's not going to help a candidate to achieve well. And some of them struggled with clarity, with overcomplicated or muddled storylines and weak endings that were not closely related to the events that had unfolded. And for the AO5, again, we're looking at the examiner report pages 51 to 53 here. The more successful candidates were able to use a wide range of grammatical features together with accurate spelling of a wide vocabulary and correctly use a wide range of punctuation, often used for effect. More successful responses had full control of spelling, punctuation, and grammar. But then the less successful responses had difficulty communicating clearly, had poor language controls and weak paragraphing. There were often numerous errors of spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And these, for the AO5, were often repetitive with their word choices and sentence structures and had many errors. So a little bit of a summary now on the AO5 for question 10. And you've heard a lot of my voice, so I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to read through that slide for yourself. It's just a summary of the AO5. So I'll just give you a minute or two to have a little look at that. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read through that and you've all had a break from my voice. But the overall summary is from page 53. Just that's kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour, isn't it, through the June 2024 paper, but there are many insights there. And of course, the examiner report has many more examiner tips as well for your students for the forthcoming exams. Obviously, we have two sittings of this exam, one coming up fairly soon in November and the other one next June. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the summary and few final insights here. So most successful candidates on the paper as a whole read the text with insight and engagement, were able to explore language and structure and show how these are used by writers to achieve effects in response to questions 3 and 6. We're able to select a wide range of comparisons and explore the writer's ideas and perspectives in response to question 7. We're able to select and adapt relevant information from the text for question 8. Wrote clearly with a good sense of audience and purpose in an appropriate register, again in response to question 8. Then for questions 9, 10, and 11, engage the reader with creative writing that was clearly expressed, well developed, and controlled, used ambitious vocabulary appropriately, and wrote with accuracy in spelling, punctuation, and grammar. This is from the back of the examiner report for paper 1. So that's from more successful candidates. Less successful candidates did not engage fully with the text, were not able to identify language and structure, or make little comment on how these are used by writers to achieve effects in response to questions 3 and 6. For question 7, they were not able to compare the text or offered very little limited comparison. They sometimes narrated the text for questions 3, 6, and 7. For question 8, they were not able to select and adapt relevant information and did not write in an appropriate register, sometimes copied from the original text. For the writing question in section C, questions 9, 10, and 11, they were not able to sustain and develop ideas clearly. They produced heavily scaffolded or learned essays, and they did not demonstrate accuracy in spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So a little bit now about support. I'm sure you all know about our free access to scripts, which I think we've had going now since 2017, where you can see the response of your candidates for each of these questions from results day. So I think you probably all know about this. It's a self-service, online, free, instant tool that you can use, and it cuts down on you having to ask for reviews of marking. So it's a very useful tool for you. I'm sure as well you all know about Results Plus. Again, of course, that it's a free online analysis tool. It gives you detailed breakdowns on your performance as schools in each of the questions, against national, against averages, against different, against schools in your regions, against schools of your types, all those kind of things. And you can sign up for a free account if you haven't got one, following that hyperlink. This presentation is obviously in your downloads for today. The third platform I'm going to talk about is Exam Wizard, where you can use homework assignments, you can use the mark schemes, the most recent exam content is there faster than it is on the general website, and so on. Again, that's a free platform that you can use to devise exam papers and all kinds of other tools in there. I'm sure also many of you know Claire Haviland, who's our subject advisor for all things English. So specification A, specification B, GCSE, the 4ET, English literature, GCSE, the international A level, home A levels, and you have there her phone number, her email. You can sign up for her regular subject updates that get sent out. And any questions from the presentation today that you think of at the end of today's training, you can book an appointment, you can ask Claire. I see a couple of questions coming in, so I'm just going to, you missed the first few minutes and new to Edexcel. How can I get the download of the resource? Okay, if you scroll back up through the chat, you'll see a hyperlink there, or you can also get it from the resources tab. I hope that answers that question. Lovely, and thank you very much in the background for popping the hyperlink there that came in as I was talking there. So they were obviously all of our courses are advertised online, and that hyperlink there will take you to other development courses from Pearson. So those will be available to you. And I'm just going to pop that. Any questions there? So this is a very, very quick course. We have done a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it's all useful stuff for you. But if there are any further questions, please feel free to type them in now. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So thank you very, very much for coming. I hope you've learned some useful insights from the June 2024 paper, got some useful resources, and I'm going to pass back now for this event to be closed. Thank you.